Hi, fifth graders. This video is going to refresh your memory on the traditional method or the turtle method of multiplying, and it will show you the one small twist you have to make sure to include when you're multiplying by a decimal number. And remember, we could be multiplying for any of 4 different reasons or functions. We might be making equal groups, we might be finding a part of a group, we might be finding a part of a part, or we might be resizing something. For any of these types of story problems, you can use the traditional method if it's what you like best. So we'll look at 2 examples first, 5 and 4/10 times 8 and 3 and 24/100 times 1 and 8/10. So first, we're going to line up our factors vertically, and just like with whole numbers, the factor with more digits goes on the top. So in 5 and 4/10 times 8, the 8 is a single digit, so I'll put that on the bottom. That means we'll do 5 and 4/10 on the top. Now here's where you need to add one extra step when at least one of your factors is a decimal. You're going to count the number of digits after the decimal point in each factor and write that number in parentheses next to the factors. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, in 5 and 4/10, I have one digit, the 4, after the decimal point. In 8, I don't have any digits after the decimal point because it's a whole number. So I'll put a 1 next to 5 and 4/10 because there's one digit after the decimal point, and a 0 next to the 8 because there are no digits after the decimal point. Now I'm going to multiply just like I normally would, ignoring the decimal point. So 8 times 4 is 32, 8 times 5 is 40, plus 3 more is 43. I'm going to multiply pretending like that's 54 times 8. Now I have to put the decimal point back into my answer in a place that makes sense. So to do that, I'm going to add up the numbers in my parentheses and then place the decimal point based on that. So if I add together the two numbers here, 1 plus 0 is 1. What that means is that I need to move my decimal point so that there's one digit after the decimal point in my answer. In other words, I'm going to take the decimal point at the end and shift it back one spot to make my answer be 43 and 2/10. And finally, of course, I'm going to check my work. So that makes sense as an answer to me because 5 and 4/10 is a little bit more than 5. If I was multiplying just 5 times 8, that would be 40. So a little bit more than 5 times 8 should be a little bit more than 40. And 43 and 2/10 is a little bit more than 40. So let's take a look at 3 and 24/100 times 1 and 8/10. 1 and 8/10 has fewer digits, so that will go on the bottom. If you notice, I don't have to worry about lining up the decimal point. That's one less thing to think about. But I do need to count the number of digits after the decimal point. So in 3 and 24/100, I have 2 digits after the decimal point, and in 1 and 8/10, I have 1 digit after the decimal point. Now I'll multiply. So 8 times 4 is 32, 8 times 2 is 16, plus 3 is 19, 8 times 3 is 24, plus 1 is 25. Then I have that placeholder 0, 1 times 4 is 4, 1 times 2 is 2, 1 times 3 is 3, and add them together. Finally, I'll add together the 2 digits in my parentheses, so 2 plus 1 is 3. That tells me that I need to move the decimal point 3 spaces to the left, starting at the end of my answer. So I'll go 1, 2, 3 spaces, which tells me my final answer is 5 and 832 thousandths. Let's take a look at a couple more examples using the traditional method. Okay, so decimal multiplication using the traditional or the turtle method is exactly the same as whole number multiplication, except we have to take into account the decimal points. So if I'm looking at the number 1 and 35/100 times 6, I know that means I'm making 6 groups of 1 and 35/100. So I'll start by writing my 2 factors vertically. Then I need to count the number of digits that come after the decimal point in each of my factors. So in my first factor, I have 2 digits after the decimal point. But in my second factor of 6, I don't have any. So I'm going to keep those in parentheses off to the side, just as a way to help me when I'm done. But right now I'm going to multiply as if there was no decimal point in this question. So 6 times 5 is 30. 6 times 3 is 18, plus 3 more is 21. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. Now here's where these two numbers in parentheses help us. So in order to figure out where to place my decimal point in my answer, I can add together the digits in these two parentheses, so 2 plus 0 equals 2. And then I'll move the decimal point so that there are 2 digits after the decimal point in my answer. In other words, I start at the end and I go 1, 2 loops and place my decimal point here, which means my final answer is going to be 8 and 10 hundredths, or 8 and 1/10. And if I think about that, it makes sense because 1 and 35 hundredths is a little bit more than 1. So if I multiplied 1 times 6, my answer would be 6. So by multiplying a little bit more than 1 times 6, my answer should be a little bit more than 6, which is true of 8 and 10 hundredths. Let's take a look at one where we have a 2-digit factor. I'm still going to set up my problem vertically. 31 and 5/10 times 23. If you'll notice, there's no need to line up decimal points when we're multiplying. So I'm going to pretend like there's no decimal points as I multiply. But to keep track of the decimal points, I'll write in parentheses how many digits come after it. In my first factor, it's 1, just the digit 5, but I don't have any digits after the decimal point in my second factor. So now I'll multiply. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 more is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. Since I have a 2-digit factor, I need that placeholder 0. 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 more is 3. 2 times 3 is 6. Add all those pieces together. 5, 4, 9 plus 3 is 12. Carry the 1. 1 plus 6 is 7. Now I need to look back over here and add together the two numbers in parentheses. So 1 plus 0 is 1, which tells me that I need 1 digit after the decimal point in my answer. So I'm going to go back 1 space, which tells me that my final answer is 724 and 5/10. So when you're multiplying a decimal number by a whole number, or the order of these could be reversed, it could be a whole number by a decimal number, you're going to count the number of digits after the decimal point in each of your factors, but one of those factors won't have any. The same exact process works when you're multiplying a decimal by a decimal number. So let's look at 2 and 1/10 times 0 and 5/10. Now this looks like it's multiplying a 2-digit number by a 2-digit number, but I know that that digit 0, I don't really actually need to multiply by, so this is kind of like multiplying by a single digit up here. The same thing is true. I'm going to count the digits after my decimal points. So I have 1 in my first factor, and now I have 1 in my second factor. 5 times 1 is 5. 5 times 2 is 10. Now, if I wanted to, I could do a whole other row of zeros, but I know that I don't need to do that. So now, in order to place the decimal point in my answer, I add together these two parentheses. 1 plus 1 is 2, which means I need to move back 1, 2 spaces. So my final answer is 1 and 5 hundredths. And if we think about this one, it makes sense because 5/10 is 1/2. So if we're multiplying 2 by 1/2, we should be pretty close to 1, which 1 and 5 hundredths is very close to. Let's do one more example together. This time I have 8 and 19 hundredths times 5 and 3/10. Again, no need to line up decimal points when we're multiplying. In my first factor, I have 2 digits after my decimal point. In my second factor, I have 1. So now I'll go through and multiply. 3 times 9 is 27. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5. 3 times 8 is 24. Placeholder 0. 5 times 9 is 45. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 4 is 9. 5 times 8 is 40. Add all those pieces together. 7 and 0 is 7, 5 and 5 is 10, carry the 1. 9 and 1 is 10, plus 4 is 14. 2 plus 1 is 3, and finally 4 is there. Now I need to add together these two numbers in parentheses. 2 plus 1 is 3, which means in my final answer I move back 1, 2, 3 spaces to tell me that my final product is 43 and 407 thousandths. So when you're using the traditional method, remember there is no need to line up your decimal points when you're multiplying. The only change is to count the digits after the decimal point, write them down off to the side so you can keep track of them, and then at the end, count from the back of your number so that the sum of these two parentheses is the same as the number of digits after the decimal point in your answer. Thanks for watching some of these extra practice problems. Have a great day, everyone.